Hello Year 11 and welcome to your final lesson in this unit of work on the UK's evolving human landscape. Today we're going to be following on from your lesson on rural challenges and start to think about the opportunities that rural areas are able to create for themselves. Your learning objectives today are to be able to describe how rural areas are creating new income and economic opportunities for themselves and the impacts of these. You're going to be able to explain how rural diversification can have challenges and then assess the impacts of rural diversification. Once again, we're going to focus on areas like Cornwall and Turling, so the rural areas that we already know. Make sure now you have everything you need in order to complete the tasks in this lesson, and remember that you can stop and start the video as much as you like. The first thing I'd like you to do is copy down this explanation of rural diversification into your books. While you're doing that, I'll read it out to you and then you can pause and get the rest down. Rural diversification is the development of new methods to generate income or make money that are in addition to or instead of traditional rural economic activities such as farming, mining or fishing. Farmers either do this by finding other ways to make money from their farm whilst continuing to farm, or they transform their farms into a range of completely different businesses. So today we're going to look at what farmers do and what other primary industries in rural areas such as Cornwall have done in order to make more money and improve the economy in those areas. Remember, when we talk about primary industries, we know that these are difficult industries to work in. They do not make that much money for the people who are in work and also for the local economy around them. So, why do farmers have to diversify and find other ways of making money? So hopefully you're starting to think about this in terms of primary industries. Firstly, supermarkets will pay low prices for farmers' products, especially for milk. So if you're a milk farmer, you are not going to be making enough money in order to sustain your farm and also your family. Also, cheap food is now imported from abroad, meaning that farmers from the UK have to sell at competitive prices, therefore usually lower prices. So again, they're not making as much profit as they once did. And then again, as we know, places like Cornwall and Turling have experienced quite a large decline in primary industry in those areas. And this obviously has included the decline of farming. This can be due and date back to the time of mechanisation, and now we have obviously large machinery that do the work of 20 men, but also this idea that we're importing a lot of products from abroad that are more cheap for consumers to buy. So here you've got two examples of how a farm might diversify. So they might change what they're doing in order to generate more money. So at the bottom left, this is an example of an eco lodge that was set up on a farm, and on the right is a wind farm. So lots of farms now are turning to renewable energies such as wind farms and solar farms in order to make money. The first task I'd like you to do and submit to your teacher is this table. So if you have the PowerPoint, you're able to drag these into the correct boxes, but I'd like you to go through these and I'd like you to decide whether you think these ways of diversification are involving products, so the things that are being produced on the farm, whether they are for leisure, recreation and tourism, or whether it's a form of rural diversification for energy. So for example, you might decide that a farmer's market, the first one there, is both products, so it's selling their products, but it's also going to create tourism for that farm too. Pick your own is this idea that you might go to a farm and pick your own strawberries or vegetables, or there are now pumpkin farms that you can go to and pick up your own pumpkin. So again, you might think, well, that's a product, you might think it's tourism. I don't mind, you could argue both, but work through the rest of them and decide where you think these different types of rural diversification go. Are they a product? Are they part of leisure, recreation and tourism? Or is it an example of energy? So hopefully you can now tick some of your answers, and you can see that these are all different ways that farmers can now make money that isn't the traditional farming techniques that they've been used to. So some farms might now be a campsite or a caravan site. They might now be bed and breakfast, or they might have their own cafe or restaurant on the farm. Some farms also will sell off some of their crops as biofuels, and they might turn entire fields that were once used to grow crops into solar farms or wind turbines, wind farms. So these are just some ways that farmers can change what they're doing or add to what they're already doing in order to generate more income. So what I'd like you to do is I would like you to just recap this. Some of this is from your previous lesson, so the 4 main primary industries in Cornwall. I'd like you to write those down. I'd also like you to write down what, in your own words, what rural diversification is. And then I'd like you to read all of the information on slides 7 and 8 and list all of the advantages and disadvantages of rural diversification that you can. So that's your second task, these 3 questions. And as you can see now, we have got this information from the textbook. This is talking about an old disused quarry, okay, which has now been turned into a huge tourist attraction in Cornwall. So the Eden project is a year-round visitor attraction, and tourists can visit whatever the weather. So there's under these big domes. They actually, underneath all these big domes, you have different biomes, okay, so different biomes displaying different plants and rainforest kind of regions in each dome. So this is a really good tourist attraction. If you can imagine what a quarry would have once looked like, this has obviously transformed this area. So I'd like you to read all of this information, and I'd like you to pick out some of the advantages and disadvantages of this example of rural diversification. I'd also like you to read this information about farming and diversification. So I'd like you to read everything here, and I'd like you to again go through, and you can either print it out and highlight or write down any of the advantages and disadvantages of diversification, such as farm shops like Lobbs Farm. And then finally, a third way that we can discuss rural diversification is through tourist accommodation. So many farms might be converting barns and other buildings into accommodation for tourists. So barn conversions, but also campsites are becoming really popular on farms. So just reminding yourself that this is rural diversification. These farms were not originally designed to host tourists and to encourage people to go to them, to their cafes and restaurants. That wasn't the original purpose of farms. The original purpose of farms was to grow crops and to rear animals. But these farmers are diversifying, they're changing what they're doing in order to make money. So what I would like you to do is I would like you now to take everything that you've learnt, okay, everything that you've learnt in this lesson, and you're going to have a go at answering this 4-mark question. So it says, using examples, explain the advantages of rural diversification. So just a reminder, so this is your task 3. So this is a short PEQ, not your main practice exam question for this lesson. So what I would like you to do is I'd like you to try and have a go at writing the answer to this question as best as you can using examples from the previous slides. So you can talk about the Eden project, or you could talk about Lobbs Farm in Cornwall too, or you might also discuss tourist accommodation. Some of the key terms you could include could be income, seasonal jobs, skills, benefits, and I would like you to, if you're struggling, use the sentence starters in the blue box. In the specification, it also makes a point of you needing to know what the environmental impacts of all of this diversification can have. So your previous practice exam question was looking only at the advantages. So clearly the advantages will be economic, but also they will improve maybe the lives of people living in these areas by providing more jobs. So there are definite economic and social advantages to rural diversification, but one of the big problems is the impact that diversification can have on the environment. So hopefully in these pictures you can see one big problem there would be traffic, would be air pollution, would be congestion on the roads. Also, you have lots of people coming to places. This is Stonehenge on the top right. So Stonehenge is a really important historical place, and as you can see, lots of people there, most likely littering. You've also got overcrowding in small areas within Cornwall now because tourists are being attracted at specific times of the year. Again, another example of littering. And then this one with the birds. This is an issue that is happening because barns are being converted into tourist accommodation. Now, old barns on farms are brilliant homes for birds, nesting birds. So unfortunately, the homes of these nesting birds are obviously then being damaged or destroyed. So that's a huge environmental impact that we maybe wouldn't already know. So I've summarised some of the advantages and disadvantages here for diversification. I'd like you to read through these, make sure you understand them all. You can copy them down into your own words, but as you can see, some of the advantages are mostly to do with the economic advantages or benefits that diversification can have within an area. The disadvantages rely much more or kind of reflect much more the environmental and social impacts that might have on local people and local habitats. Using all of that information from the previous slide that I summarised for you, I'd like you to have a go at this question. Now, remembering all the time when we do an 8-mark question, we should be bugging this. So bug the command word. The command word here is assess. We know now how to answer assess questions. You need 4 AO2 points, which would be your explanations of the 4 impacts. So you pick out 4 impacts and you explain them and you get 4 marks. Now, in this question, it says assess the impacts of rural diversification in a rural location that you have studied. So it does not specify positive or negative impacts. So you could give 2 positive and 2 negative impacts of rural diversification in the rural location that you've studied. The other 4 marks come from assessing the significance of each of these by referring to whether they are economic impacts, environmental impacts, or whether they are short-term and long-term. Maybe you might bring in the idea of sustainability, and maybe some of these are sustainable impacts, okay, that will last a long time, and others maybe are actually reflecting unsustainability within the region. So impact here we underline because it's one of the key words, the key themes. Remembering that impacts can be social, environmental or economic, but also positive and negative. For this question, try to focus on 2 environmental impacts, 1 positive and 1 negative, and 2 economic impacts, 1 positive and 1 negative. Rural diversification, as we know, is finding new ways of making money from rural industries such as farming. The rural location here would be Cornwall, and you can use your examples of the Eden Project and Lobbs Farm to help your answer. So that is the final part of the lesson. Make sure you do this to the best of your ability and submit your 8-mark question to your teacher by the deadline. I hope this has all made sense. Well done for getting to the end and good luck with completing the work. I'll see you again soon.